And the idea is that you want to inject the solution right there before the major growth occurs. If you do it at the right time, you have a rocket ship that you can jump on.
They're speakers, authors, and real-life rock stars, bringing you life-changing thoughts that rock, taking conversation all the way to 11.
Most shows only go to 10.
Well, it's one louder, isn't it? These go to 11.
This is Thoughts That Rock. Now, here are your hosts, Jim Knight and Brant Menswar.
What's happening, peeps?
Hello, everybody.
It is your favorite podcast.
It's mine, at the very least.
Thoughts That Rock, where we look at current challenges or just interesting tidbits where we get incredible thoughts of advice from guests. And sometimes it's just us.
Sometimes. Today it was not.
Today it was definitely not. Today my eyes rolled into the back of my head several times because this dude is so smart.
It's true.
I mean, like, I like eggs.
That could have just been one of our responses, right? It's funny. We, the topic really came from our guest, and we said, how can we understand the difference between a trend and a fad? And there actually is a difference. And so we found our good friend, Paul Barron. I say, at least my good friend, I've known him for a long time. This guy is a tech and media executive. He's a genius mogul. In a lot of ways, mogul, mostly in consumer science data platforms. And I know in the blockchain now for a decade, Web 3.0 is definitely where he's playing right now. I knew him mostly in the restaurant industry and from the National Restaurant Association, but man, he's had tons of TV shows, podcasts, different web forums. And I just think he's been a trendsetter in so many ways. He really has been in front of some things that maybe didn't work out and they were fads, but most of them he's recognized a trend. And so, it's the perfect marriage of the topic and the person, but oh my gosh, there's a lot going on in this episode. There's no doubt about it, right?
And it's a lot, but it's amazing information.
Totally is.
And it really, for those who might find themselves, on the front end of a fad, or wondering if what they're doing is actually going to stick around long enough to become a trend, this is the episode for that.
Yeah. And I'm on the front end of some fat.
Are you?
You did say fat, right?
Fad, I said.
Fad. I'm so sorry. Check this out. There he is, my good friend Paul Barron in his own house. What's up, Paul?
Yeah.
How's it going, man?
I'm doing great this morning. Thanks for having me on the show, guys. It's been this will be fun.
Yeah, us too. I mean, obviously from the introduction, and I was trying to explain to Brant all the things that you've been involved with, and I've just known you predominantly from my restaurant background, and we've seen each other at the NRA show. That's the restaurant show, Brant, not the Rifle Association. Just to be clear.
Yep.
We always have to make that delineation. But man, we know that the topic here was pretty interesting. We were talking about what would be a great topic for Paul because he's so well versed, and to have this idea of how to understand the difference between a trend and a fad. Man, we couldn't think of anybody better because of you. I mean, you're involved in a lot of trends. Let's just start there. And you seem to be in the forefront of a lot of that. So, man, we're happy that you're here. We're just going to turn it over to you, brother. What is your first thought that rocks on how to understand, a trend versus a fad?
Well, I think for your audience, one of the things I want to kind of give a baseline on is just some of the trends that I've been involved in and have been able to identify early enough, I think, within a certain level. When I got out of school, college, I, basically had two choices. I could either join the FBI or join Microsoft. Literally, that was what was happening. I was being recruited by both these entities. And I chose the tech route, went to Microsoft, thought, I love technology, computer science was my background. And just dove into it, learned a lot about, and my first job was the hospitality industry. And that was really what got me set up in connecting to food. But computer science was kind of led us to it. And I spent about 5 years with the team out there at Microsoft in Redmond. And then what happened was I was working with all these retail brands, and I noticed there was this underlying thing that was happening in the space, and it was this very interesting segment that was unnamed at the time. Now it's called fast casual. And I said, I think I could help these guys with at least the technology, because all these operators that I was talking to, whether it was Panera, you looked at the early stages of Starbucks, we were working with them directly. And I said, I think my tech background would really help them, to kind of go to the next level. So I started as a small consulting business, and that business basically fell on its face. And I learned, you learn very quickly that you left a high paying job to go into business for your own self, and it kind of just goes away. So that was one trend that did not work out for me. But the side effect was this thing called fast casual. So I took a rando, and that was started developing a website called fastcasual.com. And at the time, everybody was kind of just, what is this? It isn't the same as fast food. So it was really understanding the early markers of mostly consumer and operator shifts that were occurring. That was kind of the identifying these early trends. When you look at trends, there are always early markers. Many people will kind of just brush them off as, it's in this particular case, it might be a fad, or in some cases they might be looking at it as, other components of other trends that are already underway. Okay. And fast casual was one of those that had some very interesting early markers, and the markers that I identified, at least in that time period, was this consumer connection. And there was a real unique difference between consumers that went to fast food and consumers that went to Panera Bread. Panera Bread was one of the real first icons that were growing. And what Ron Shaich had been able to do was he did something very unique. I lived in Texas at the time, and he started really franchising in the central United States. And one of the things that you notice quickly in the demographics was that if you can make it in Oklahoma City, or you can make it in the middle of middle America, you might have something that could work on the coasts. Yeah. So Panera was really good about that. I had been consulting with Panera when I had started the consulting business. I said, "Hey, listen, I'm thinking about starting a media company, and I want to focus on this little thing I've called fast casual." And everybody was kind of just looking at it as, it's just a form of fast food. It's never going to be anything. McDonald's will eat their lunch. There's no way this will ever be anything. I had so many operators telling me this, and then I got a chance to meet up with a handful of I think minds in the industry that really started to change at least how I perceived food. And one was Steve Ells. Steve Ells of Chipotle, when he had 3 units, Chipotle. And I met him at his restaurant in Denver for the first time. And then I started piecing together these very unique characters in the industry. Ron Shaich, Panera Bread. Greg Dollarhide was over at Baja Fresh when it was a very small brand. All of these operators started coming together, and then I realized there's something here, and there seems to be an underlying swell. So it was consumer and the business executives that were trying to fill the need. Those are the two markers that really you had to identify early on to find out if it is a fad or a trend. Typically, what will happen in the fad, because I've seen a lot of fads come and go, is that one of those sides will break down. Either the consumer side demand will break down, or the executive side supply will break down. And that's when it is truly a fad. And it'll have its runtime, and it just goes away, and it will never see sustainability. Now, there are trends like fast casual that will be very, very slow, a slow burn kind of thing. And it's usually because of how society or technology is able to embrace it. And that's the thing that fast casual was very unique on. We started the website, but it took a decade for that website to get to a point where it became the industry standard. We were then acquired. So we joined in with Networld Alliance at the time. I brought in QSR Web and also fastcasual.com. We merged those media companies into Networld. And now you have the Fast Casual Executive Summit, which we started, the Fast Casual Alliance, which was transferred over to the National Restaurant Association, the Fast Casual Top 100. All those were born under our leadership when we launched it. So those are the two things that I would say when anybody's looking at trends versus fads is if the consumer demand is there and engagement, it can't just be, a TikTok moment. It has to be something that really has connection. And there are amazing innovators over on the business side trying to solve the problem. When you have those two magical components, you now have a trend and it's no longer a fad. And that was really what kind of born into fast casual. Other areas that kind of worked in this for me was in 2006, we launched our first podcast. Now, it was called Podcast Grill. And it was everybody made fun of this. I mean, you should have seen the ribbing that I got, it was so bad. And all the executives in our team, because I was kind of the young kid and I was bringing in all this tech, he's a Microsoft guy. Sure. He understands this tech guy. He knows what RSS is. He gets it. And, the podfather himself, the guy who pretty much created RSS, is a guy by the name of Adam Curry. Now, Adam Curry and I hooked up at a conference one time in 2005-06, and he was in the process of transferring the IP to Apple. This is the guy that handed Steve Jobs RSS. I kid you not. That was the birth of it. And that was the guy that pretty much set me on the idea that decentralized media would be one day the evolution of where media would go.
Yeah.
And, even my team that I was working with there at Networld, they just said, hey, there's no demand. And he was right. You had only a handful of executives. So there was where a fad could have broken down.
Yeah.
And in fact, a podcast has been called a fad many times, throughout its career of development. And only really in the last 8 years has podcasting become a standard. And it was because the two magical things occurred: consumer connection and demand, and executives, or thought leaders like yourselves that said, hey, we have something that we can deliver to these people over here.
Yeah.
And that was kind of an interesting time, in podcasting for me. We launched Podcast Grill. We were the only podcast in the restaurant industry.
Wow.
One podcast in the entire restaurant industry.
Yeah.
And it was fun. We launched it. And of course, from there, we kept growing, fast casual at the time. It was pretty crazy.
So first off, Brant, I want you to start calling me the Podfather.
Podfather.
Yeah, I think that's what a great title. I want something like that.
I'm going to call
you. That one is reserved for Mr. Curry.
Yeah, somebody else already has that.
This guy is the real deal.
And when you were, so a couple things. First off, I initially wrote down, identify the early markers. And my question would have been, what are those markers? You've already said that. I mean, the two, if you've got the combination of consumer engagement and a group of innovators or executives, like you said, that are solving problems, if those two things are happening or happened, then you've got a trend. So I think that does help, I think, explain to people the difference between the two. And I can tell you when, I was involved in a fast casual restaurant on the side. Once I left my executive day job working at Hard Rock, I got into the fast casual pizza business because that was just starting, I want to say 10, 12 years ago with Blaze Pizza, Mod Pizza. They were really the only two big dogs. There were a couple smaller ones, but
who were you working with?
I and a couple of my friends wound up doing one in Canada, which is sort of the Canadian brand up there of fast casual pizza called Score. And and a lot of people don't know this, but pizza is one of those categories that really hadn't changed in decades.
Today, I think the term is is more endearing as a sector because the consumers have finally caught up in mass to understand what fast casual is. Even I hear, kids in our church and, things like that, that will say, "Hey, let's go get fast casual." And I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
It's
oh,
fading.
wait a minute.
Part of the
A teenager
zeitgeist.
said that word.
Yeah.
So they understand what Chipotle is. They
Yeah.
understand that there's a higher level of quality. 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, no one would have ever said that.
Yeah.
So this gets back to, it's a term now that has been accepted in society, and it's identified a special sector of the restaurant sector now at around 70 billion in revenue. So, when we launched fast casual, there was 19 restaurant concepts that we could identify. And you can imagine we're talking just a few $100 million in revenue, where now it's at 70 billion in the sector. Pretty
Amazing.
crazy.
I think we're seeing that again now, at least in the last year or so, 18 months, with Nashville hot chicken, right? So
Yep.
the hot chicken trend now is starting to really gain momentum, and we're seeing I don't know if that might be the latest I can think of, sort of in that fast casual
Maybe
community.
poke bowls before that.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
But the business that we had, I loved it because I think now fast casual as customizable. You
Mhm.
could certainly go in and sit down and order pizza in 20, 30 minutes, it'll come, or you could order it online. It'll be there in 30 minutes. But to
Right.
have a 800 to 1,000 degree oven, and you get to go down the line and pick exactly what you want. They throw in that oven, and in 3 minutes, you got a really good pizza. It blows my mind that that's possible. And I wonder where else it's going to take us. What other section of the industry it's going to attack? But it's fun. And the fact that you were a part of all that and really started and labeling and was involved in it. I mean, it just goes to show your success, man.
Yeah.
Good thing
It was
it's
a
not
good
a bad
time. I
one.
mean, we launched Fast Casual Nation, which was the first documentary on
Yep.
the sector. That was in 2013. We documented all the industry icons, did a full documentary. It's on Amazon, so you guys check it out, just Fast Casual Nation. And then I wrote the book in 2010, which was called Chipotle Effect. I drafted it for the first time. I wrote it twice. I wrote the first book in 2006 and 7, and it was a different name. And then Chipotle began to literally just explode in 2007, 8, and 9. Remember, this is right around the economic crunch that we
Yeah.
took.
Yeah.
And Chipotle did something that I talk about all the time, and that is seizing the moment. When things look like they're going south, the guys who kind of go into the headwinds are the ones that absolutely just eat the markets. And that's what Chipotle did. So I said, okay, this is a different kind of model now, because now we saw a Titan literally being built. And I said, okay, we've got to change the name of the book. Let's rewrite, 6 chapters. Took me another year to get that done, more interviews, all that kind of stuff. Rewrote the book, called it a Chipotle Effect, and we launched it in 2010. Actually, debuted it at the National Restaurant Show in 2010.
I think
That's
that's where I got
13
my
years
copy.
ago.
I have my signed copy. Yeah.
Right.
13 years ago.
It's crazy. Time's flying.
Crazy.
All right, brother, give us your second thought that rocks on this. How to understand a trend versus a fad.
All right. So there, when you kind of look at the early markers, those are very key in identifying certain elements of trends. The other one that I use a lot is a thing I call the adoption curve. Now, because I grew up in Silicon Valley and got a chance to live through dot bomb, 2000, year 2000, 1999, I was in Silicon Valley as a young engineer, and I understood what that meant. And really, we started to see these adoption curves. I stayed there, when I saw the evolution of where all this was shifting. When you look at what happened post 2000, I had separated, started going into the consulting career, but I still had a lot of friends in the valley, and we started to see all these great companies just dying on the vine. Obviously, at that time, there was like a $7 trillion write down in the S&P. from all these publicly traded, blue sky companies,
Yeah, we know a
every
couple.
.com you could imagine existed.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, wow, this could be a fad, or we could be at the beginning of an adoption curve. And that's what happened was when you get through the rubble of something like what happened in 2099, there's a handful of survivors that end up on the other side. Now, sometimes these survivors make it, sometimes they become something unique. But when you look at the history of the tech emergence over the past 25 years, the companies that survived in that period of time were the ones that went on to essentially dominate Silicon Valley. And that includes Amazon, Google. If you look back, and really prior to Google, it was Alta Vista, all the GeoCities, all the different search engines, the walled gardens that were happening, Odeo, which was trying to launch, which then eventually became Twitter. All of those companies were in that era. And the adoption curve is really the identifier. And it's exactly, if you ever go look, and I'll recommend this to your listeners and viewers, go look at the adoption curve of the internet. It's out there. You'll see this little bell curve that occurs. And there's a point in that adoption curve where you are either too early or too late. It's a very magical position. If you're too early, you die. MySpace, too early.
Yeah.
Facebook, third company in that sector, perfect timing. Facebook rules. Or you come in and you're too late. You're behind the 8 ball and you haven't adopted fast enough and you've put yourself at risk. Oracle versus Amazon Web Services. Oracle adopted too late. Not that Oracle's a bad company, great company, but they're not the titan that AWS is.
Right. Yeah.
And these are the things that I think any business can look at. Adoption curve, and everybody has a different adoption curve measurement because you have different markers for every industry. But you could do this in real estate, medical. You name the industry, there's always going to be an adoption curve of something in there that's driving trends. And it will, you have to be able to identify those if they truly are curves that you can pinpoint and see if there's growth. And it usually happens when the market is very nascent. So right now we have a media company that I can't even really call it a media company. We're a content company, and Rever Network sets on top. We have 4 properties. We have PBN3. We have a new property called Savor .fm, and then we have Fast Casual Nation and Chef AF. Those are the 4 properties. And one of the things that we identified early was this early adoption area of, remember, identify markers, consumer demand, adoption of consumers, and thought leaders, executives, et cetera, trying to solve the problem. That's happened in a few areas of what we call decentralized media. And decentralized media has been something I've been working on for probably 2 decades, but the technology had not caught up. There was no demand, so you didn't have this side. You had a handful of well, as Steve Jobs would say, the crazy ones out here that were trying to build stuff, thinking so far out in the future, but they weren't building to an audience that existed yet. Well, that audience today exists. It exists on Substack, TikTok, social media, and podcasts. Those are decentralized platforms, all of which, if you think about the podcast alone, the brilliance of just podcasting, that's an RSS. It's not controlled anywhere.
Yeah.
You own that RSS. You can point it in any place you want. It's no longer centralized. And that's where media has gone for the last 4 decades. And it's really, if you look at traditional media, and we'll call it the mainstream media, New York Times, traditional publications, Business Insider, will stay on the business side. You could flip over to consumer product and, from Slate Magazine and on. All those are centralized locations. And this gets back into the adoption curve. The adoption curve is this point in which there's enough critical mass to be able to seek adoption at the time in which you inject solution. So I don't know if we're watching video, but I'm using my hands here.
Yep, we are.
And the idea is that you want to inject the solution right there before the major growth occurs. If you do it at the right time, you have a rocket ship that you can jump onto. And that's one of the things that, we think is about to happen right now in media. All of this around TikTok and what's happening with TikTok, but also with Elon buying Twitter, it's shifted kind of the dynamic of how that will change. Most likely, I feel like, his X.com model is going to be really the future of where he's going with that, which will be payment and integration. If you follow Nostr, which is Jack Dorsey's company, they've evolved into a decentralized platform for social media. All of the early markers are starting to show up. Go back to point one. Early markers identify if there is people there requesting demand and if there's innovators that are supplying it. Then come back in and apply the adoption curve model, and you have the next secret on trend versus fad.
Where do you think our adoption curve is with Thoughts That Rock?
Well, I think we're still waiting. I think we came in early and we waited too long.
When did you guys? I'm kind of curious, Jim. When did you guys start the podcast?
We've had it for about 4 years. We started
See,
it.
you're early. You're early.
Yeah, we're early, and it was pre-COVID, so thank goodness, because it gave us an outlet to talk about it. And I think I don't know the exact numbers now. Brant and I were talking about this, but I know for a fact when we first started that there were something like 500,000 unique podcasts on the planet when we started. And we were like, oh my gosh, look at all that. And it's already saturated. And this came off of what was the fiction podcast that everybody was
Serial.
listening to? Which one?
Serial.
Yeah, Serial, of course. Yeah. And so when we created it, literally a year later, there were 750,000 unique podcasts. And now there's something like 3.5, 4 million.
Yeah.
So, COVID gave everybody an excuse and a platform to at least get their own content out there. But
yeah,
we've had it, and we've had different variations. And we love now that we're talking about topics that are helping solve problems or helping people with issues in their life or just basic understanding of whatever. And in our case, in your case, this is a very unique, but there are people that are in our audience that this is what they do. They try and get ahead of the trends or the fads. And maybe even my question different, maybe not Thoughts That Rock, but you think about our book marketing app that we have called Bookie Call. Where would you think that is? Because people that use it love it, but there are so many people that don't know anything about it. And it almost seems like you're making a good point, Paul, about having that infusion, that marketing. Once you get enough people, and I don't know where the curve is, but I feel like we're right on the cusp of somebody going, oh my God, I can't believe you guys have this thing. And it's it's the greatest way to discover books, right?
Well, Paul, I'd be curious to get your thought on this. So I understand what you're saying. I agree actually with everything you're saying. My question becomes, so let's use Bookie Call as an example where we are doing something that hadn't been done.
Yeah.
So we created an app that is basically a dating app for books.
Yeah.
So people sign up, they create their profile, they tell us the types of books they want, and then the algorithm matches them.
The swipe left, right
books.
thing?
That's exactly it. Yep. Swipe right. And you can take that book on a date. Now the app, you can have a bookshelf and you can rate the books and all sorts of things. And we've had almost 400,000 downloads. We have about 65,000 monthly active users now. So, it's, we are still early, but the challenge becomes when the industry has a way that they've always done it and they don't quite understand what it is that you're doing. Even with the great numbers, even with the great reviews, they still are really hesitant to adopt because they're so used to, well, look, this is what we've done. And a book comes out and we've got 12 weeks to promote this thing and then it's dead, or it's, so it's a very different approach. It is not the Amazon, we're going to do a little banner ad and we're going to run that ad, or we're going to pay BookBub, or we're going to do, there's so many different ways to launch your book in this day and age, but they are all competing with whatever else is in front of your eyes at that moment. So if
Yeah.
there's 10 other ads in front of that screen, what's going to get that particular person to look at your little banner ad that goes across? Whereas what we are doing is basically the digital equivalent of putting somebody in front of every door at Barnes and Noble and saying, do you want to add this to your to be read list? Yes or no? You can't come in until you give us this answer. And so that is a completely new idea in book marketing,
Yeah.
that we are early, and we have been early for the last 18 months that we've launched this thing. And now it's just sort of, what we've come to realize is, with startups especially, why are these startups raising $3, $4, $5 million? And it's to be able to sustain that time
Exactly.
gap between
Yeah.
early adoption and that moment, right?
It is. It's a timing scenario. We almost fast casual almost died before it ever came to life.
Hmm.
Because it was a 2-man team. I had an editor, and we were writing, and we were just pushing as hard as we could. And I mean, you felt like there was just something there, but we couldn't identify it just yet. And we were at death's door, and I was like, we're not getting any advertisers because we're too small. We're not able to crack the glass ceiling of trade publications, which ruled the land in the restaurant industry, ruled the land. Nation's Restaurant News, oldest publication ever known to man. I think the cavemen actually read that magazine. And when it was weekly, when that was a weekly rag that
Yeah,
came out in the industry. I don't know if you remember those days,
I do.
Jim, but that was my point, is that you get in that phase of do you quit because you are too early? And there's been so many companies that have done what Substack, a good example. Substack was done before. It just never got the chance to see the technology adoption. It goes back to point one. If you don't have the critical mass movement in place,
Yep.
and you've got enough of the thought leaders coming in to inject the solution, or back to your point, Brant, is that you could be early. And listen, it's not a bad thing. It's a bad thing if you want it to win, but it's a good thing if you're like, this is bettering society and or technology going forward.
Mhm.
And I know that we'll always be looked at as the people who launched this concept. And I think that is something that founders need to be aware of when they're willing to go into the arena like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
You have to know that you may end up with egg on your face.
Yeah.
And it's tough because I'm kind of in that space again. I have to compliment you, Jim. Reinventing yourself is a very hard thing to do. And you've been able to do that, I think, with Thoughts That Rock, your speaking program. The evolution of where you came from the restaurant industry to where you are today is much different than what most people that know you from the restaurant industry.
yeah,
There's people out there that know you now from not the restaurant industry.
yeah,
So
yeah. Thank you.
I think the key there is making sure that you reinvent the product on a constant basis. And this is something that people get kind of sideways on because they're so concerned about brand. And I hear the brand pitch so much from marketing people. And I'm like,
Yeah,
guys, I don't think you understand brand anymore, because brand has shifted from, it used to be brand lived within the consumer's mind, but because there's so much choice now, brand has started to splinter into so many places. And even the best and the most, titanic shift of brands has really started to change because of the way that mainly the under 30 crowd is starting to consume content. So if you have a product or an app in your case that has that addictive nature that TikTok does, or one of the other social media platforms around books for the under 30 crowd, especially if you get into the group that is kind of emerging on the internet right now. There's a new sector on the internet. I don't know if you guys have seen this yet, that are these knowledge hounds. They are absolutely just soaking up book after book after book. And there's a new sector of the under 30 population that are separating from the rest. And I call them the warrior class of what's happening. These are the people that are going to run the world.
Mhm.
And they're starting to pop up on YouTube, obviously Twitter, Substack, etc., because they've been given all of these vehicles for voice
Yep.
that they never had before,
Yep.
and because they have the ability to learn anything in a matter of 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's changed the dynamic of how people are educating themselves. So I think you're very early. And that's where innovators and great minds have to kind of admit to themselves. I had to do that with fast casual. I had to do that with mobile websites.
Hmm.
I fought tooth and nail to try to get our media companies to adopt to mobile responsive websites a decade ago. Now, today, you would be laughed at if you didn't have a mobile responsive
Yeah.
website. So I think it's just you're in that fad phase right now. You're in it. You're living what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I don't
Yes.
want to be a fad.
Yeah.
We want to be a trend. We actually do talk about this all the time. And we'll get to your third thought here in just a sec. But, with the possibility, who knows what's going to happen in this country with TikTok? Um, it'll be devastating for so many people, but it could be a game changer for others. For us, we've used they call them book talkers. They're
Mhm.
actually influencers, book reviewers, if you will, that play in our space. That would be great. Well, there are a lot of companies that put a lot of credibility in them, and there's certainly a lot of people that are looking for their next great read that will listen to a book talker. If TikTok goes away, what does that mean? I mean, what platform is available that's doing short form video, either going back to an older version or somebody new is going to come along? And how can we jump on and being cautious about it? You don't want to spend a lot of time and energy and effort and rigor and money, and all of a sudden that's a fad. So these are conversations that we have all the time. We just know that it's such an unbelievably great product. And you're right, we are early, I think, as entrepreneurs, as founders of this thing. So it's a matter of, can we stretch it out long enough for that curve? A group of innovators, somebody's going to come along and go,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I want
Yeah.
that as a part of my portfolio, or
Right.
I want to throw money
Right.
onto the thing, or whatever it is.
Oh, on
So
the back end too now, you got YouTube Shorts, you've got Instagram
Mhm.
Reels, you've got everybody trying to do their version of TikTok because it's been such a behemoth. But, Paul, to your point, some of them are a little too late to the game. And it's hard, so they're incentivizing creators to jump ship to their
Right.
platforms and giving them better rates and better returns and all these different, Pinterest is doing the same thing now. So a lot of these social platforms are obviously have seen the success that TikTok has brought, and they're trying to create their own version, but they're having a really difficult time competing when it still is the gorilla in the room.
Yeah. TikTok is an interesting animal because it's right now being used as a political pawn in
yeah,
what's happening.
Yep.
When you look at what lawmakers are trying to do in terms of positioning it, the likelihood of TikTok getting banned, I'm kind of on the fence with this one because I think it's a bad thing if we have a foreign government collecting data on Americans. That's bad. I think we all agree with that. But at the same time, I'm very pro freedom of speech.
Mhm.
yeah,
And if you have a company, if you abide by the laws, if ByteDance, flips this into a US based company, I mean, we have a lot of companies ran in the United States by foreign nationals. Let's
yeah,
just say what it is.
Mhm.
yeah,
The Saudis are in Twitter pretty deep.
Yep.
We have, we have the Asian population running a lot of media. We have a lot of people outside the United States that control a lot of what's happening in the banking industry, the
Mhm.
media industry, and all this. I think it boils down to one thing for TikTok. They got too big too fast, and they have invaded something that is the power base of, we'll just say it, the power base of political finance. And what I mean by that is Google, YouTube, one company, Facebook, Twitter to accept, they're somewhat ostracized right now from the conversation, but still within it, and still at a phase right now where I think right now it's more on the likelihood of Twitter. I mean, I'm sorry, Google, YouTube, and Facebook that have so much to lose if TikTok wins this battle of short form. And because of that, it changes the dynamic of how much money goes into the lawmakers' coffers for campaigns, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I
Sure.
think this is the where it gets a little bit of sideways with me, because I'm very pro, as I said, pro freedom of speech.
Sure.
And as long as it's done right and it's abiding by the U.S. laws, I don't care.
Yeah.
Everybody has a voice, and please use it. I don't care,
Yeah.
what you say, as long as you're not, creating some sort of craziness, fire in a crowded theater kind of thing. But the point being is that, and I'm going to answer your question, because I think what you're getting at is our third point here is, how to position your business in front of fads.
Mhm.
Yeah. How do you do
Because,
that?
okay, so what you guys are dealing with right now is you're in that mode where you could position in front of this what is could be a fad right now for the book industry. Okay,
Mhm.
we're in the same boat right now with our network called PBN, and PBN3 is 2 years ago I took a flyer away from our new platform, our platform that we spent the decade building, called Foodable. And Foodable, we're making a big announcement here today on the show, is positioning your
Surprise.
business in front of a fad. So we're doing it. We're actually going to walk the walk that we talk,
Mhm.
and Foodable will be dissolved as a company.
Wow.
Oh,
The
okay.
reason is because we have media products that lived inside the network for the last decade that became so big individually. Fast Casual Nation became so big.
Yep.
Chef AF became so big. And the Restaurant Report, many of the other podcasts, could live on their own as their own thing. They don't even need a network any longer, because they
Yeah.
got to a critical mass level. So we launched Savor FM, which is our new decentralized content platform. Decentralized content. That's what we want to focus on. So eventually, all of our content will live in the ether. It's going to live on Substack, on Spotify, on iTunes, on
Mhm.
TikTok, on YouTube,
Mhm.
and we're going to reach the audience where they are, rather than trying to draw the audience to a centralized location, which is
Makes
what
sense.
.com has been about forever.
Yeah.
Sure.
So positioning your business in front of fads, and we may be moving out too early. I'm willing to take that as a risk, and saying we may be going too early here, because there's not anybody in our industry that's doing this. In the blockchain industry, people get this 100%. They understand what decentralized versus centralized means, even in the finance system. And what taught me this was 2 years ago, almost three, when COVID happened. It almost destroyed Foodable. Our advertising revenue went to almost zero in literally a matter of 90 days.
Yeah.
What we had spent 8 years building was almost gone. We Fortunately, we were a podcast network, but it shut down all of our on location filming. That was gone. We no longer film on location. We had these 6 great podcasts that were so on growth, and it was a blessing in disguise, because all of those shows exploded.
Yeah.
Restaurant Report became, I mean, that's 100,000 subs now. Fast Casual Nation, 70,000 subs. Chef AF goes from 4,000 subs to like 32,000 subs. I mean, you're talking almost 10x in this period. And so really what happened is it created this new almost media properties that were splitting off of what Foodable was and becoming their own ecosystem. So we launched on Substack this year, and oh my God, Substack changed the game, because their block networks existed a decade ago,
Wow.
15 years ago. And now you've got Substack now, where people are sharing content from one blog to another, international search. They've cracked the code for SEO. They basically have taken the book of social, content, blog, podcast, and wrapped it up into one place. So they're really in a good position, I think, to become the next TikTok for media, decentralized media distribution, because you own all your content. You can download everything from there
Yep.
and redistribute that down the road if you decide to go to another platform like Ghost or something like that. So positioning your business out in front of these fads, sometimes, it takes some huevos. You got to be able to be
Yes.
willing to do something that not many people are willing to do.
Yeah.
And we're going to be doing it with Savor. Fast Casual Nation is now launched on Substack. In a matter of 30 days, it went from 3 countries and 21 states to 39 states and 14 countries in a matter of 30 days because of discoverability. Same thing with podcasts, discoverability on Spotify, discoverability on iTunes. This creates new audiences that many times you don't even know where they're coming from till you get the demo data. So we see this as really the next generation of how content will be delivered is decentralized. So no one platform can take you down. If Twitter goes down, no problem.
Yep.
Now, hey, listen, if it all goes down, we're all in the shit. But
We're all in
but
the
if TikTok gets banned, not a problem. You flipped over to, or you have a presence on YouTube or on podcast.
Yep.
So I think that's the key with businesses is you have to be able to really risk the willingness to grow over the next decade. Because there's going to be so much in the way of innovation. Tech, AI is a big part of our business. We're building an algorithm system right now that will help us identify platforms based on AI analytics that are working better, so we can apply pressure to that platform. So if it's TikTok doing better, if it's Spotify doing better, iTunes doing better, whatever it might be, we can pressure, rather than in the old days when you're building a media property, it was just how do we get more views to our website.com.
Right.
And to me, that era is dead.
Yeah.
The .com era, I think, is over. I think decentralized Web3 and the future of where that's going to go with people owning their identity and their control of their data,
Yep.
this will shift things in the next decade for sure.
Well, I think this is, certainly gutsy, but it's smart. But I wouldn't expect anything different from you. I think you've been in front of a lot of these things. You've been successful at all of them, and you've reinvented yourself and sort of added layers throughout the probably 20, 25 years that I've known you. I think we're somewhat similar on a micro scale. I don't know if Brand is also a keynote speaker. So we make our living as keynote speakers and authors, but we have other businesses. We have a training program called Certified Rockstar. We talked about Bookie Call, which is our app. And then we've got Thoughts that Rock. So we don't have everything in one bucket as well. If everything was to go down in all those areas, we'd be in trouble. But in fact, we know for a hard fact that when COVID was here and there were no events, no speaking, no income whatsoever, thank God that we had other things that we could go and play with. And I almost think this last thought, positioning your business in front of a fad that hopefully becomes a trend, is kind of where we are, maybe even more than the other two. I think you said it best. We probably are perceived as a fad. We might be a little bit early, but as more and more people gravitate to it, and if we can get the right people, and even some of the big 5 publishers, we still work with them. But when we get the right person that says, I can't believe this thing exists and it's been out here for a year and a half, and somebody hasn't done something with you, I think this is a great opportunity for us. So, all 3 of these thoughts are fantastic. And I know you've got so many places that we can send people, so many businesses. But if people wanted to learn, I don't know, a little bit more about you, Paul, or maybe just about your particular businesses, where would you like us to send them?
Well, PBN3 or Paul Barron Network is kind of our new growth vehicle, which is the blockchain Web3 component that we're spending a lot of time in, because I think that platform is going to seep into Savor, and also into Fast Casual Nation, Chef AF, all of our decentralized platform and media products now,
Yeah.
just because of how blockchain and Web3 will be growing. And we are spending a lot of time. That's about, I would say, 60, 70% of my time right now is spent on the PBN side of things, primarily because of, I've spent 3 years educating myself on where blockchain was going. And we were early on blockchain in 2012 and 13 when it really launched. When Bitcoin first got going, I was always intrigued because I identify these fads early. I picked it and I said, hey, maybe I should buy some of this Bitcoin. And I looked at it so hard and I thought, it's a fad. And I backed away from it. Boy, was I wrong. Now this thing has absolutely reshifted dynamically, and now it's in the global conversation with gold and digital assets that are $12 trillion. I'm like, okay, what in the hell just happened?
Yeah.
Now that's 10 years later, but if you look at the last 3 years when we really got into focusing on blockchain and understanding what blockchain was, because what spoiled me on blockchain was the restaurant industry. And here's why. When in 2008 and 9, or I'm sorry, 2016 and 17, 2016 and 17, blockchain was being introduced into the restaurant industry by companies like IBM. And it was going to handle source material, all these kind of things. When I started looking at it at that time, because I was heavily involved in food service at the time and tech, and I started looking at the basis of where that was going to go, and I thought, this is way too early. These guys they're going to burn out. They're way too early. This is one of the it doesn't match rule number 1, consumer demand and innovator. It had the innovators, but it had no consumer understanding. So it flamed, and IBM got away from it. And most of the companies that were starting to work on it just detached. And 3-4 years later, before 2020, all those companies were just gone. Now you have Starbucks implementing digital collectibles, which is basically an NFT, running on the Polygon network, which is a new decentralized platform. You've got McDonald's running in it. I know you guys know Jeff Alexander over at Wow. He just launched, or getting ready to launch, his own NFT. NFT Wine Club is getting ready to launch. The integration now is real. Now we're starting, and the use case, go back to, fad number or item number 1, how to identify trends. This is what we're dealing with. It has the 2 markers now, which is finally there's an audience and there's innovators. And now we're in that magical creation period of adoption curve. That'll be the one. Where do you inject into that adoption curve? No matter what business you're in. Starbucks, they can take a flyer because they got so much money. McDonald's, they can do the same thing. In the food industry, we're going to see a lot of tests, a lot of fails. This is the Wild West period right now, and it's going to be fun to watch.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, man, you gave us 3 great thoughts. I mean, I hadn't even thought about this topic. And again, I know you had a couple others that you could have come to the table with, but I think helping people understand the difference in the 2 was spot on. And, you mentioned a lot of different companies in your own sort of orbit. We'll make sure that we've obviously got all that stuff in the show notes as well. But
cool.
I'm so thankful that you were able to spend a little bit of time with us. I know this one, for some people, it might be heady for some of our audience members, because we've had how to write a hit song and how to use Brazilian jiu-jitsu in life. You're coming with the smart stuff, man.
I might actually like the Brazilian jiu-jitsu thing. That's a fantastic topic. Are you kidding?
It was a great episode with our good friend Jim Trigg. But you were equally as awesome, man. Thank you, Paul, for spending a little bit of time with us. And man, I look forward to seeing you in person at some point soon. It's been a while.
We will. Yeah, it has been a while. That's for sure.
We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, brother.
All right. You bet. Take care, guys.
Hey, rock stars. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Yeah, and listen, we know how busy you are, and grabbing those little nuggets of wisdom that can amp up your life are super hard to come by. So we hope this episode helped you enough for you to maybe subscribe and consider leaving us a rating and a review so that we can continue to grow the show.
Thoughts That Rock is a proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network and also supports Cannonball Kids Cancer and their fight for finding and funding treatment options for kids who have run out of options. They're amazing. Their work is incredible. To learn more, please go to cannonballkidscancer.org.
Finally, if you're interested in having Brant or Jim or both of us speak at your event, whether as a virtual webinar or an in-person conference keynote or mastermind, contact us directly at thoughtsthatrock.com.
Until next time,
Rock on!